So Summit's where all the rubber meets the road. And it's not just where the rubber meets the road for those of us who teach. It's where it meets the road for those of us who are being taught.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the show, please take a moment to review it on your favorite platform. That lets more people know about these interviews with great guests, major thought leaders from various fields of influence who show how our worldview changes everything. My guest today is one of my friends coming back for a new episode. This is so cool. J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective. He's an adjunct professor at a seminary. He's a best-selling author. He's a faculty member here at Summit Ministries. He's spoken to tens of thousands of young people through the Summit Ministries universe. It's incredible. Jim became a Christ follower at the age of 35 after investigating the claims in the New Testament Gospels using his skill set as a detective. He later earned a master's degree in theological studies from Gateway Seminary, and his ministry provides content and tools to help people investigate the claims of Christianity, and he makes a convincing case for the truth of the Christian worldview. Please welcome J. Warner Wallace to the show. J. Warner Wallace, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, Jim, you've been on the show before. We've talked about patterns of evidence.
Yeah.
Which is a fascinating book. And what a lot of people may not have known yet, or they haven't put all the pieces together in their mind, is that you are America's cold case detective. Like
no.
Anybody
Someone says these things, and then suddenly this is the label you get. I mean, I'm glad it's a positive label, but that's interesting.
It's a positive label, but let me just go ahead and say to anybody who's watching or listening, if you committed a crime a long time ago, you don't want Jim Wallace on your case.
Well, it's been so much fun to work those cases too. And I still get calls all the time I do a lot of work with law enforcement now and marriage resiliency. And a lot of these guys end up working cold cases at some point, and they will call me and say, hey, can I send you this? They're getting ready to write a search warrant or getting ready to write the warrant that is for the arrest. And they're like asking me, what do you think? And I just love that I still get a chance because of those connections to look at cold cases. And it is a weird kind of profile case. And when I wrote Cold Case Christianity, I really had been working cold cases for some time. And it was easy to see the connection, because a lot of us are trying to figure out, like, how do you prove something, or how do you even demonstrate this is a reasonable inference when you have no access to eyewitnesses anymore? That's the biggest thing about cold cases, is you often don't have access to the people who claimed they saw something. And that's a skill set we can use even when we examine Christianity.
Well, I'm pleased to say that you have a new, revised, updated version of your classic book, Cold Case Christianity, out and available. So we get 30 or so minutes to talk about that. Thanks for coming on the show. Yeah,
well, and this is something that I felt like when we got the chance to do it. Our good friend Greg Kokel was the one who I just kind of was watching him. He re-released Tactics, that book that we tell every student at Summit Worldview Ministry. We tell everybody in the program, you should get this book. And I thought when he did it, I thought, I don't want to release a book, and I don't know if I really have the energy, and what would I do to make it? So I really didn't think I was going to do an update. And when I was got closer to the 10th anniversary, I realized that there are some things that I wish I had said differently, and there are some areas that you do the presentations on the stage so many years that you realize, if I could do it again, I would make it more visual. So this ended up being a pretty heavy lift. I didn't think it was going to be, but it really felt like another book launch for us, because so much of it we tweaked and changed and re-illustrated. So it was fun to do.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into all of that, talk about what's new for the people who already have heard of or read Cold Case Christianity. Maybe you have this book on your shelf, but there are a lot of new people coming online because there are new students who come through Summit Ministries who are watching or listening to the show. There are people who are new to a relationship with Jesus who are listening or watching the show. And there are people who are watching or listening thinking, my Christian friends say something about this. And so maybe I should pay attention to see what these crazy individuals believe. So it's pretty diverse. And I'd love to just have you talk about the cold case approach. So you came at this as a Los Angeles police detective working on the kinds of cases as you mentioned, for which there are no longer eyewitnesses available.
Right. So when I first started this, I became a Christian in the mid to late 90s. And I was about 35 when I became a Christian. And I had been working as a detective for a number of years as a senior detective. But I had not worked I'd opened cold cases, but never solved one. So I was kind of mastering the techniques used to do that. I was assigned to a surveillance team at the time. And we were working mostly robberies and burglaries and an occasional homicide if the homicide team asked us. But my dad had worked as a detective a generation before me. And he had a case that was a case of a girl. It's a solved case now, so I can tell you who it was. It was a girl named Terry Lynn Wallace, and she was a 10-year-old who was killed in our city in 1972. That case remained open. It bugged my dad for all those years, and when I was working undercover, I had enough time, and I happened to bump into a confession of a guy who confessed to the murder years ago. He wasn't the killer. He confessed. He's crazy. He confessed, but he wasn't the killer. We didn't solve that case till 2019.
Wow.
But I remember opening that file about, I'd say, a year or two before I attended my first church service, and I was assigned in a detail where we were working forensic statement analysis. In other words, that's where you look at the statements that people in custody will make. And we'll tell them before we do the interview, I want you to write everything you did yesterday, the day of the murder. I want you to write it all down on this side of the paper. You give him an ink pen. He cannot erase anything. He's got to cross it out. And you start to examine the words that he's using to looking for deception indicators, looking for little tells, things that'll give you insight into whether or not he's the guy who did it, and maybe even tell you what time of the day he did it. So we're looking at these tells. Well, that was the kind of fascination I had when I first attended a church service. And by the way, those are the skills that we use in every cold case. Even though at that point I had only opened a case, I hadn't actually solved one. So I think this is really the skill set you develop, right? It's the same. But by the way, if you're a regular detective right now listening to this, there's not a lot different. If you're working homicides, there's not really a lot different. You're still assessing witnesses the same way. So if you've worked in law enforcement long enough, you're probably got some of this skill set already mastered. You know when someone's lying to you. You kind of get good at it because you get lied to so often. So that was the skill set I brought in as I was examining the Gospels. I just knew that witnesses are reliable under those 4 conditions I talk about in the book. Were they really there to see what they said they saw? Can they be corroborated in some way? Have they changed their story over time? And do they have a reason to lie to me, a bias, a motivation to lie? So that's how I attested the gospel authors. I wasn't really like Lee Strobel, our friend. I wasn't trying to prove his wife Leslie became a Christian first. I wasn't trying to prove Susie wrong. Susie wasn't a Christian, so we became Christians at the same time. So it wasn't. I thought, well, I can apply. How am I going to look at this? I know what my skill set is. I'll just apply my skill set. I remember one time, Jeff, I was teaching this class for the first time, Cold Case Christianity at Biola. And I had a student come in, an older guy. He said, I want you to know, I think this is a gimmick. I think this whole cold case thing is a gimmick. I said, okay, I can understand that. It kind of feels like it could be a gimmick. Let me teach the class, and you tell me how you feel about it at the end. And as I taught the class, he realized, it turns out that this is kind of what historians do anyway.
Yeah.
But historians never get a chance to put their case in front of a jury. And there's the difference, is that laboratory of epistemology that we run, called a courtroom, actually helps us to figure out, well, how should we think clearly? And then how do we communicate that to a group?
Yeah. So Jim, when you see a witness statement, and you've seen, thousands of them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
You can pick out right away if somebody's lying.
Well, not right away, but there are tells.
Okay.
And so I'll circle those tells, and I'll say, this is an area we have to investigate more. Because either I'm not getting something or they're deceptive here.
Okay.
And there could just be that's just the way they talk.
What are so what are some of the things that you look for that indicate to you there's a problem here? Okay,
well, so the things we're looking for, number one, are optional words. So optional words give you away. If you said the cat ran across the street, well, that's pretty much every word there is necessary. The cat ran across the street. If you said the black cat, well, now I've added an adjective, black. So if I said to you, I always use this illustration. If I said, okay, this is my, by the way, all optional words are adjectives and adverbs. So I circle all the adjectives and adverbs first. So if I said to you, this is my black clicker, what am I really telling you? I'm telling you, if you think about it, that I have more than one clicker.
Yeah.
Because clearly I don't need to use the word black. You can see it's black. Yeah. If I'm telling you it's a black clicker, it's probably because I have another clicker of a different color. So I have at least two. And the other one's probably a different color. So I've told you a lot with just that one optional word. So I'm circling optional words. I'm circling use of pronouns, how you describe somebody. Sometimes that'll change. If I said my beautiful wife went to dinner with me last night, if I said my wife went to dinner with me last night, or I said the wife went to dinner with me last night, or my old lady went to dinner with me. These are all different ways of saying the same thing, and they matter. So I'm circling pronoun use. I'm circling tense when we use tenses. Or when we use, like sometimes you'll accidentally put something in the past tense that should be in the present tense. Those things matter. I'm also looking at compression of time and expansion of time. So if you're taking a paragraph to explain something that happened in 4 seconds, there's probably some reason for that. Or if you're skipping over 4 hours of time in the day without any description at all, maybe there's something. So these things don't necessarily tell me that you're being deceptive. I have to build a case, though, off these little bits and pieces of evidence, linguistic evidence. And you could take that same approach. One of the reasons I did that was because I heard pretty early on when I was investigating the Gospels that, because I was like thinking, who the heck is this Mark guy? He's clearly not an eyewitness. Where does Mark show up in the Gospels? So I thought, why would anyone consider him an eyewitness? Well, the early church considered this to be the eyewitness testimony of Peter. And there are early church fathers who write about this. So I thought, okay, well, if that's true, I should see some unique features of Mark's gospel that tell me that Mark is sitting at the feet of Peter. And so in the book, I try to explain all the different things I see using a forensic statement analysis that would tell me that, yeah, Peter actually is. You know, kind of the story begins and ends with Peter. The rough outline of the story kind of follows Peter's rough outline in Acts at Pentecost when he's preaching the story of Jesus. Also, Peter is almost always described in the most favorable light in Mark compared to the other Gospels. You know, Peter's an idiot in almost every gospel, but when he's an idiot in Mark's gospel and says something stupid, Mark will add, and the other disciples agreed. Why are you adding that? You know, it's like he's covering for his buddy. Even the denials of Peter are softer and more buffeted in Mark's gospel. So there are good reasons to believe that. I needed to know that, because by the way, I get it. Luke's not an eyewitness. He tells you he's not an eyewitness, but he tells you he has access to the eyewitnesses. That makes sense. So I expect then that Luke would have some element of his writing would include eyewitness testimony. John is an eyewitness. He claims to be. And then, of course, Matthew claims to be an eyewitness. So and then if Mark is the eyewitness testimony of Peter, as it's been recorded by Mark in his teaching in Rome, well, then you have a way of kind of testing things now. And so that was important for me. And I didn't know any other way to do. Look, I didn't think any of it was true, but I thought it was interesting. Yeah. I thought it was fun to test. And so my first Bible, and I've got it sitting here. Just hang on one second. Okay, so I wasn't prepared to slip back there and get this, but I wanted to show you how this worked out for me. The first Bible I ever bought was a Pew Bible. I didn't want to spend a lot of money on this silly thing. So I kept it, though. It's in this folder. Yeah. And so it's one of these cheap $6 Pew Bibles, right? And I just tabbed it all up, and I started to do forensic statement analysis. And it looks a lot like, I think, like regular Bible studies if you've got people who work in their Bible. But what I did was there's certain colors you use. So if you're circling pronouns, that's going to be one color. If you're circling adverbs and adjectives, that's another color. And then in the margins, you're kind of saying, okay, come back to this. Here's what this connects. Oh, did you notice this pronoun changes over here? Here's the first place it changes. Why is it changing there? You know, that kind of stuff matters. For example, John, when John refers to Mary, it's really interesting if you track just the references to Jesus' mother in the Gospel of John. So you only would do that, though, if you start circling pronouns. And so for me, all these Gospels have this kind of color-coded, study where you're just kind of picking out all the stuff that you're doing from forensic statement analysis. And that really was just fun. Also, it's a great exercise if you're somebody who, you know how many interviews I would do with in custody suspects. This gives you much more fun. You can do a lot more because you only get that many people in custody you can do this with. But I had this Bible every morning, and I would get up in the morning and I would sit in the next room, which used to be my daughter's bedroom, and before we had my daughter, and I would just sit there for hours messing with these forensic statement analysis. And that's what kind of got me in. I mean, I didn't reach any conclusions, but when I got done, then I was like, wow, what do I do with this? This is passing the tests. And I get it. There's a lot of people who say, well, you're nuts. There's still these unanswered questions. Well, here's what I always say. Every case has unanswered questions. I've never had a case in which I could answer all the questions for the jury. I have to tell the jury that before I start. So in cold case, I started to add some of that back in the 10th anniversary edition. I wanted people to understand that, look, what we're suggesting to a jury is there's an evidence trail that leads right to this suspect. It doesn't lead a foot to the left of him or a foot to the right of him, but it stops short of the suspect. And that stopping short is where all of your unanswered questions are. And you're going to have to take a step from the end of the evidence trail across to your unanswered. I know you've heard me say this to audiences before, but this is what we do as Christians. Yeah, I still have unanswered questions, but the evidence trail seems really obvious to me. And I'm willing, I don't think it's unreasonable to step across the end of the evidence trail, across my unanswered questions, and make a decision for Christ. And so that's really was the process. And here's the good thing about that, Jeff, is that sometimes people will say, well, have you ever been shaken by something that came up since you become a Christian that you thought, oh, well, this isn't fit? No, here's why. I went through all those shaken things. In other words, I had to jump over all those hurdles to get here. There won't be a new hurdle to jump. I jumped them all to get here. Yeah. So I feel like that then leads you to a place where I can say, no, could we be wrong? I always say it this way. Is it possible? When someone says, is it possible X? I don't care what the X is. I always say yes, because anything and everything is possible, but we don't live at what's possible. We live at what's reasonable, because you'd be frozen to death. You'd be stuck. You wouldn't be able to move if you had to have 100% certainty without any unanswered questions. There's nothing you have that certainty about. Yeah. Nothing. We've seen, you and I have met people in broken relationships. They thought their relationship was one thing and had no idea. You operate your car. This technology we're using to record this interview, we don't even know how any of it works. We have more unanswered questions than we have answers, for sure. And I think that we still operate. We still move forward. You put your key in your car. You put the key in the lock on your door, having no idea how a tumbler lock works. But you don't get frozen. You have good enough reason to believe that door is going to open. And I think we have more than good enough reason to believe that Jesus is exactly who he said he was. And that's what I try to cover in Cold Case.
Yeah. Well, that's what drew me to it. You and I first met around the time that you were writing the book, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
And I had a fascinating conversation at Josh McDowell's house.
Yeah, it's at Josh McDowell's house. That's right.
We skipped out on listening to Josh McDowell to sit on the front porch.
That's terrible, isn't it? That's terrible. I know.
I'm admitting this now. Sorry, Josh.
Yeah. Well, and I think it was Sean, his son, who said, hey, you guys can, and he kind of like set it up for us. So he was encouraging. His own son was encouraging us to do that. So it's not our fault.
Well, I just thought it was so fascinating. And I had a ton of questions at the time. And subsequently, you now have spoken to dozens of Summit Ministries, summer sessions, adult groups, powered by Summit conferences that churches put together over the weekend.
That's right.
And you've made yourself available at an extraordinary level. So thank you for doing that, because just through Summit Ministries, you've been able to intentionally and intensively train, I don't know, 15,000, 20,000
Yeah,
people?
I wonder. I did for 7 years. I was doing every session. I think as it gets a little, there's always a kind of changing of the guard as young apologists come up, and I love that. I always kind of feel like, well, am I getting too old to? But I think as long as you're passionate and you're speaking at a level that, students come to Summit, we push them. We push them to the highest level. Yeah. I never change anything. I don't think anyone does who teaches there changes their material in some some way to reach high schoolers. There's no reason to do that. Those high schoolers who come, they find themselves in an environment where suddenly they're working at college level information, and there's so much passion in the room, there's so much passion in the program that they are willing to stretch to and be transformed. And they see all kinds of other students around them who they become very close to relationally, who are also stretching and transforming. And so it's like this, there's a certain synergy that occurs at Summit that you just cannot achieve any other way. I mean, we can do, conferences over the weekend, which are good and they're important. But the stuff we do, that's the immersive stuff over 2 weeks, is life-changing. And it's life-changing, I think, also for the people who come and teach there.
Yeah.
There's just nothing else like it. And it's something that I think I notice a lot of the younger apologists who come up behind me too they'll always post real quickly on their social media about their time at Summit. Why? Because it's as powerful for them as it was for the students. And I think that speaks something to what's happening there. I mean, I think I was thinking the other day, do you remember how many people went through L'Abri with Francis Schaeffer and probably felt like, wow, how blessed were we that we caught this window in which this ministry even existed so we could experience it. My wife and I were just looking at books this morning. She's trying to decide what book she wants to read next. And we got a bunch of Nancy Pearcey books here. And that's part of her story, right? Like she happened to catch that window where she could be in Europe. And there's going to be a bunch of students in this generation, and really a pretty broad span of generations now, that can say that they happen to catch the opportunity in this ministry. That's why I don't know why this is. We should be overwhelmed with applications for what's happening here, because this is a fleeting opportunity. We don't know how long we're going to have it, and we hope we have it forever. But we'll see.
Yeah.
And so I think while we have it, we ought to be like saying this is the thing that changes lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And we put everything we've got into it. And thank you for your investment in those students. And you've also mentored other young apologists who kind of caught the bug, who came to Summit. They heard you speak. They thought this was fascinating. It caused them to want to explore Scripture in a much more intensive way than they ever had before. Did you know that only 1% of 18 to 29-year-olds hold a biblical worldview? That means that 99 out of 100 young people you meet are held captive by counterfeit truth. But that's exactly where Summit Ministries steps in. We train over 65,000 students a year to form and to keep a biblical worldview for the rest of their lives. The transformations are remarkable, and they're lasting according to our 1-year, 5-year, and 10-year alumni surveys. But I need your help to reach more of these spiritually hungry students. Listen, for just $33, you can sponsor an hour of training for a student, and that hour can make the difference between spiritual life or death. So when you become a monthly partner, I'm going to send you stories of the students you've created opportunities for, and they're going to bless your life. And as a listener of the Dr. Jeff Show, I know you care about the rising generation. Will you help them through Summit? To donate, go to summit.org/equip. Summit.org/equip. And as a thank you, I'm going to share with you a curated collection of lectures, interviews, and videos so you can see for yourself the worldview shift that students are receiving. That's summit.org/equip. Now, I did a podcast. In fact, we recorded it earlier today from a recent Summit Ministries graduate who is now at seminary and is going into youth ministry. Because he got caught up and excited about the opportunity you have to communicate truth to the rising generation.
No, this is what happened to Nancy too, right? She has this challenging upbringing that really challenged the way she drifted away from Christianity. And then when she discovered what she just says, I discovered Christian apologetics under Francis Schaeffer. And it changed everything in her life. Well, that's the people think, well, you can't talk someone into Christian. You can't argue someone into the faith. Well, yeah, of course not. Look, it seems to me that God could use any mechanism at all to draw people. He could make it so that no one ever has to preach the gospel. We all just we're visited by God in dreams. God has the power to do that. Instead, he uses us to say something. So then God uses that statement that we make. Now, the statement looks different for different people. I think in the generation we're working, it's going to be different than it was a generation before. I think you see that Christian case-making books, apologetics books, are different than they were a generation before. We've talked about this before. Yeah. It's not just, is it true? Is it beautiful? It's not just, is it true? It's, is it worth giving my life to? Different kinds of questions that young people have maybe than a generation ago. But what's beautiful about this is that we can answer all those questions, both the is it true and does it matter? Those questions, we can answer both those questions for young people. And I think when you do, and by the way, that is a part of presenting the gospel. Because for me, I heard the gospel. I get it. I know what you Christians believe. It just made no sense to me and I was not interested. But the way the gospel came to me was through the evidence of the gospels.
Yes.
And that's the way that I needed to hear it. That was my way in. So can you be argued? Of course, it's all God, top down. But God's going to use different ways for different people. And that's the way I think most of us who are talking about the evidence, we know there are other people out there that need to hear it this way.
Yeah. So for those who have not yet read Cold Case Christianity, what Jim is describing here is a process of reading through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, asking the question, did these guys believe they were telling the truth? And then being very specific in giving evidence for how that case can actually be made. Then moving from there into, as you mentioned, Jim, making that leap. So the evidence trail points in this direction. It doesn't point you on that final step over here or over here. It points you here. And so now you said that you needed to update it because there are some things that you said you would do differently.
Yeah.
Which means now all of us have to go out, except for me, because you sent me, or the publisher sent me a new copy of the book. But everybody else, you're going to have to go out, get the new copy of Cold Case Christianity. If you haven't read it, you want to go ahead and get that. You're going to find it fascinating. It is a page turner, literally is, like a novel. And when you said you had to update it, though, you got to tell us, why, what needed to be updated? What new things have you learned?
Well, and here's one of the reasons why I did it too. I was thinking about, well, should I add all this stuff that we've changed and tweaked a little bit and how we present the evidence on the stage visually? I knew when I wrote that book, it was the first book I ever wrote, and the publisher didn't know me from Adam. And I said, I want to illustrate this because I believe in a visual approach. So how can I illustrate it? Well, yeah, I can illustrate it, but there was only so much they were going to do in terms of page count to let me illustrate it. So of all my books that I've written, like 9, this book was the least illustrated of all of them because as I worked more with publishers, they trusted me more, and they gave me the bandwidth to actually. My person of interest has got 400 plus illustrations.
Yeah.
So I knew that this book maybe had 90, something like that. So I just felt like I really missed that opportunity. Then they asked me, would you be willing, this was maybe 8 years into the book being out there, would you be willing to record the audio version of the book? Because we had an artist record it originally, and now, it sells a lot, so can you just record it with your own voice? And I said, well, sure. So I was recording other books anyway. So I recorded Cold Case, the original version. And as I was recording it, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I would not say it this way. I was just so frustrated with the way because it's your first book. And now I've given it on the stage presentations probably 100 times plus, way more than that. So I just thought it's time I wish I could rewrite that. So I said, okay, 10th anniversary, we're going to do it. Well, it turns out that we added 300 graphic elements and illustrations to the book. So now it looks much more like Person of Interest than the other one. We added It's a much thicker book because we added so much new content, not just a postscript, which has like a bunch of questions that have been asked about cold case over the years that are answered, but just updated entire sections like archaeology that has, believe it or not, in 10 years, things have changed. So we added that as well. And just kind of rewriting. So I think my whole goal was I had people who owned the book in mind. Now, I hardly ever read reviews, but I did look at Amazon the other day, and because one of the top review, I thought, oh, this is sitting here right in front of me. And it was somebody who said, wow, this is so much better than the original book. And I thought the original book was good. So I thought, okay, that was satisfying to me. I felt like, okay, here's somebody who, because I'm targeting, if you've already got the book, why would you buy another book? Well, because I think there's a lot more stuff in here that I'd like to get across to you. And I think it's much more presentable. So you'll see if you compare, one guy online actually compared it page by page to see all the updates. But I think it's a much different book, but mostly because now the publisher was willing to let me add 100 pages. I couldn't get that before because he wasn't quite sure what to, and I also was concerned that if we add these graphic elements and these other additional details, I want us to still read fast. I don't want it to feel like we bogged it down. I think we have done that. We've kind of, you're telling cop stories, and when you tell cop stories, it does. I think sometimes people are more interested in the cop stories than they are in the data. But you are trying to, like you said, you want it to read more like a novel that has the facts. Yeah. And so that's kind of what all of our books are like. They're all cop stories because I think there are some parallels, and that's appropriate. I can understand why that guy in that Biola class years ago said, "Oh, I think this is a gimmick," because if you think about, okay, there's this cold case detective that came out, and who the heck is he? I get that, and so I try to be pretty modest about what I think we can achieve with this process, and if it helps somebody, great. I think God has used it to help a bunch of people. But at the same time, I can understand why somebody would think on its face, this feels like a ploy. But it really was simply my journey in. It's the only skill set I had. Well, look, I was a trained architect. I suppose I could have, but I wasn't doing that at the time. I was working as a detective. So that was what I knew best. And that's the path in.
Stephanie and I have given the book Cold Case Christianity to quite a few people who were not believers or who were skeptics or who shared with us that they wish they knew more about what they actually believed. And here's my observation. 60% of people are asking, are you giving a narrative that makes sense of reality? That I can see, I can track it. I can see this really resonates as true. 40% of people are just saying, skip the narrative, give me facts. So for the people, for either group, being able to see these visuals, it takes so much data, puts it all into one page, your eyes can capture it. Then you make sense of it. So I love it. But give us a couple of examples of some of the things that you added that you felt like, I wanted to clarify this, or here's something new that wasn't available to me when I wrote this first book.
Yeah, well, one of them, there's like in two categories. One of the categories is just that I felt like you learn stuff when you present on the stage that makes it clearer faster. And I had an illustration, and when I say an illustration, not just a graphic illustration, but I had a parable, basically, a metaphor or an allegory, just trying to figure out a way to parallel this. Yeah. When I was talking about transmission of documents. And on the stage, I always use this real life thing that happened to me where I sent a text message and it was, Siri or the Apple iPhone mechanism changed some of the words so that when I got there, it was confusing. And I've always used that on the stage. It requires a series of kind of progressive illustrations to make it work. So I always wanted, I did that after I wrote the book the first time. So I didn't have that approach in the book. Yeah. And everyone I've ever talked to says, oh, that was money. That was worth the price of admission. That really clarified it for me. Like why, when you see the variations between the Gospels, these variations don't really matter. and they just needed to see that illustration. And once they've seen it, you can't unsee it, and then they no longer have a question in that area. So I made sure that kind of stuff was in this book. Anything like that where I've learned something that I tweaked it on the stage to make it more powerful, that's in there. Also, the section on archaeology, I just wanted to deep dive you since I had the opportunity to redo it. So there's so much more data in terms of archaeology, just broken down into the different kinds of levels of archaeological confirmation. Because I think some of this stuff is more powerful, more obvious. Some of it's very nuanced, and I wanted to give it all. I didn't have any of that nuanced stuff in there the first time, so that was in there. And there's things like that. Also, that entire afterward section, that was, I spent probably 4 or 5 years responding either online or in presentations or in interviews to some of the things that questions were raised for people that maybe I didn't think would be a question, so I didn't have it in the original book. Well, now those things are included in the book as well. So a lot of it is either just new data that I knew I probably should have put the first time, or a kind of a way to rephrase this so it's much more powerful. Yeah. And I took out the old illustrations, the old approaches to that I think just don't communicate as quickly. And they aren't as powerful when you think about those illustrations as this new set is. So I think it's more persuasive. And hopefully when you read it and when people read it and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to retell this to my friends, they can use the illustration themselves quicker. But here's the other thing too. As I was getting ready, I was building a course at Gateway Seminary, a course in kind of a case-making evangelism is what we call it. And I went to Gateway Seminary here. It was called Golden Gate Baptist back in the day. That's where I got my degree in theology. So I was working with this. I've done this course there now twice. And it involves 30 video lessons of about 20 minutes to 40 minutes each. It's over 10 and a half hours of content. And that was we were doing that at Gateway. Well, I wanted to make this publicly available. So what we did with this book is we created this Case Makers course. It has got all the written material that goes along with it, fill-ins, note-taking, kind of mini assignments. And at the end, you can earn a certificate. And we give it to anyone who purchases and reviews the book. Pretty simple. But it's a way for us, if you're going to purchase the book anyway, well, take the time. Have you thought about maybe training up and becoming the best Christian case maker you can be? Reading a book will take you so far, but this 10 and a half hours of content covers every book I've written. So the idea is to kind of get you all the way from 0 to 100 with that Case Makers course. And so that's available online to anyone who gets Cold Case Christianity, a new edition. Yeah. And that was just kind of another opportunity because I saw this coming and I thought, hey, you know what? I've wanted to launch this Case Makers course forever. And I just want to be able to kind of put it out there. So what's the gateway? What's the entry point to it? Well, someone was telling me, why don't you just charge X number of dollars for this thing? Well, because to be honest, I don't have a need for that. I have a pension. I think you and I have talked about that. I mean, I still live on my detective's pension, which has been fine. So I feel like, hey, I'm in a place where I could actually just give this away. But how do I get somebody who's actually invested in it, who really wants it? Well, if you buy them and review the book, the Case Makers course is yours. That's perfect. So you buy it on any online platform. Website, then they will just post a review. That's right. And you'll see on the top of our coldcasechristianity.com website, you'll see the banner for the Case Makers course. Just follow those instructions and you're good to go. Yeah, man, that's great. Well, I've always loved the case notes in your books. Mm-hmm. Yes. I think that's especially fun. I read a lot of books. I rarely search down the footnotes because if a point makes intuitive sense to me, I'm like, well, whether somebody else says it is true, it just makes sense. So I got it. I'm always looking at the footnotes when I think, I don't know about that. Not quite sure about that. I'm not sure about that. Who actually said that? Why would they say it that way? Yeah. But your book is one of the few where after I finished the book, I actually just kept reading right on down through the case notes because you give so much cool insight there. And I think that's really important for people who are a little bit skeptical by nature. Mm-hmm. I'm Gen X skeptical. You tell me something, I'll be nice to you, but inside I might be thinking, man, they are full of it. Yeah. Well, I know we're going to get short of time, but let me tell you, it's so funny. When you do Remy warrants for a judge to sign for an arrest, these things are huge. I had one that was 400 pages. It's sitting right back here in this notebook here and behind me. And so it's like 400 pages of just data collection. Now, at the very end, I will. So Your Honor, for these 15 reasons, we now know he's guilty of this crime. And then in that last 2 pages, let's say 3-4 pages, you'll give the 15 reasons why you know he's good for the crime based on the data that we collected in the first 200 pages of the warrant. So you're collecting all of this data and then writing a quick summary of it. Well, cold case is kind of the flip, right? We had to collect all that data, but now the book is kind of like that 3 or 4 page summary for the judge. And the case notes are kind of the first part of the Ramey warrant. They're just all of that data collection. So these things take years to file a case. Our cases have taken anywhere from 3 to 19 years to prosecute. Is that crazy? From opening to closing. But that's what these books are too. That's why I don't write a book you write a book every couple of years, because I'm spending the next 2 years researching for the next book. It's all the data collection that then you flip. And so you're writing reverse Ramey warrants is what you're basically doing. And that's what these books kind of become. Way to put it. So,
I'm very excited about this. Thanks for coming on to talk about it. You've given insights to people who are new to understanding your work on how this process works and how you can have confidence that the Bible is true. But you've also given us a lot of insights into those of us who are familiar with it, some of the new things that you are learning and have available. Man, what a great conversation.
Thanks,
really
brother.
Appreciate you, brother.
Well, you know that all my work has been shaped by my association with Summit. It's really as simple as that. So Summit's where all the rubber meets the road. And it's not just where the rubber meets the road for those of us who teach. It's where it meets the road for those of us who are being taught. So my affiliation with you guys has been pivotal to all of this. So I'm just glad it started. And isn't that crazy how, for me, it started at the same time. As I'm writing this book, I got to meet you. So it's been really a great run. So I appreciate you.
Yeah. Well, all started with playing hooky on Josh McDowell.
That's right. That's right.
All right, brother. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the show. I always love these conversations with J. Warner Wallace. He's so amazing. And man, I'm glad I'm a law-abiding citizen, because I would not want to be on the other side of the courtroom from that guy. Well, if you want more resources that help you live out a biblical worldview, including J. Warner Wallace's Cold Case Christianity, you can head right over to summit.org/resources. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. If you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student or reach the next generation as an educator, church leader, or parent, head over to summit.org/resources to find out about the programs, the articles, the videos, the ebooks, and more that we offer. Also, if you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. Download it at edify.app, spell EDIFI. And then you can also search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.